Have you ever actually stopped to think about who really runs the business world? I mean, when you buy your morning coffee, or say, launch a startup, or even just invest in the market, are those businesses truly operating solo? Or is there a hidden hand, a silent partner, if you will, guiding, shaping, and honestly, sometimes dictating the rules of the whole game? Well, today, we're going to unravel exactly that.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're exploring the anatomy of state intervention. We're going to break down, in detail, exactly what the government's role really is when it comes to business.
All right, here's the roadmap. We've got 1. Laissez-faire to mixed economy, 2. The fourfold role, 3. Regulating the market, 4. The government as entrepreneur, 5. Promoting and planning growth, and finally 6. The 1991 economic reforms. Let's get to it.
Part 1. Laissez-faire to mixed economy.
Okay, so to really grasp where we're at today, we have to look back at the historical extremes. Historically, the pendulum of government intervention swung pretty wildly. On one side, back in the 17th and 18th centuries, you had laissez-faire, basically zero government role in business. The state was literally just there for law, order, and border protection. But as that idea kind of fizzled out, it gave rise to the total opposite extreme, state capitalism. This is where business is strictly in government hands, totally run and regulated for the wider interests of society. But as history quickly showed us, neither of these extremes actually worked for sustainable economic development. We desperately needed a pivot.
And that pivot? That brings us to the mixed economy. Because the truth is, there's no country today that's 100% capitalist or 100% socialist. Take India's economy, for example. It's a perfect textbook case of this dynamic mixture. You've got the coexistence of public, private, joint, and cooperative sectors all meshed together. And the exact recipe of this mix? It's totally dynamic, shifting all the time. But because it's a mixed economy, the state can't just play one single note. It has to wear multiple hats all at once.
Part 2. The government's fourfold role.
We really need to stop picturing the government as just some distant lawmaker sitting way outside the market. They're a highly dynamic, hyperactive participant right in the middle of it. Once the government backed away from trying to just be the entire business world, its role evolved into 4 distinct dimensions. Think of it like a sports game. This makes it super easy to remember. The government is playing referee, player, cheerleader, and coach, all at the same time. Let's break down exactly how they play each of these positions on the field.
Part 3. Regulating the market. So we'll start with that first dimension, the regulatory role. This is the government stepping onto the field as the ultimate referee. As the ref, they're directing business conduct. The goals here are absolutely vital: preventing monopolies, fostering new, small entrepreneurs, and making sure all the economic power doesn't just pool into the hands of a few billionaires. How do they actually pull this off? By setting some pretty strict norms. We're talking limits on utility profits, ceilings on dividends, maybe even excess profit taxes. The whole point is to keep business on a track where economic progress actually lines up with social justice. But look, being a good referee, it takes incredible balance. There are 2 absolutely crucial precautions the government has to take here. First, legal regulation can't be excessive. You can't over-officiate the game. Second, it has to be executed with maximum efficiency. If you ignore those 2 things, whether you're using direct or indirect controls, the regulation just flat-out fails to accelerate development. It basically just evolves into endless red tape.
Part 4. The government as entrepreneur. All right, moving to the second role. This is where the state actually takes off the referee stripes, throws on a jersey, and steps right onto the field as a player. We call this the entrepreneurial role, which is really just the emergence of the public sector. This is when the government says, okay, we're going to be the entrepreneur, and actually takes ownership of businesses. Now, why would they do that? Simply put, they have to take on the massive, heavy lifting burdens that private companies naturally want to avoid.
Think about it. Private enterprises usually shy away from heavy basic industries. The risk is incredibly high, you need massive capital, and the gestation period before you see a single dime of profit is painfully long. We're talking steel, minerals, heavy chemicals, power irrigation. A private CEO looks at that and sees 0 short-term returns. But from a macro level for a developing nation, these industries are literally the bedrock of survival. So the government has to step up and take that entrepreneurial lead.
That being said, this entrepreneurial role desperately needs a reality check. As our sources clearly point out, a huge number of these public sector units just end up bleeding money. Huge financial losses. Why? Well, when you have tight regulations, endless delays in top-level appointments, and this overarching bureaucratic attitude, it completely chokes out functional autonomy. You try to run a dynamic business like it's a government office, and it turns into what the sources call a sick unit. It severely limits the operational efficiency of the whole venture.
Part 5. Promoting and planning growth.
Okay, so we've met the referee and the player. Now it's time for the cheerleader and the coach, the promotional and planning roles. On one side, the promotional role is all about that indirect boost. The government isn't interfering. It's cheering the market on by providing the essential infrastructure. The roads you drive on, the bridges, your daily water and power, industrial training centers, those are direct results of this indirect promotion. On the flip side, you have the planning role, the coach. This is a massive balancing act. It's about ensuring economic viability while also maintaining social desirability, basically optimizing resources so they go exactly where they're needed most.
Part 6. The reality check, implementation failure.
Now, here's where we hit a serious point of friction. It's one thing to draw up these 4 roles beautifully on a whiteboard, right? It's entirely another to see how they actually play out in the real world. Formulation and implementation are 2 totally different halves of the development game. The regulatory framework is supposed to be the bridge between them. Take India. They build a remarkably sound, exhaustive regulatory framework on paper, but they critically lack the actual machinery to implement it effectively. The reality was pretty stark. There were just too many laws, which led to really doubtful observance. You had this massive volume of legislative enactments, but they totally failed to achieve their grand objectives because the execution just wasn't there. The state literally found its hands tied by its own red tape. A massive paradigm shift wasn't just a neat idea anymore, it was an absolute survival necessity.
Part 7. The 1991 Economic Reforms.
So in response to all this friction, we saw a historical pivot that completely redefined the state's relationship with business. Enter the new industrial policy of 1991. The government rolled out 3 massive central themes that would change the economy's trajectory forever: privatization, liberalization, and globalization. This meant actively tearing down old regulations, totally reorienting the bureaucratic mindset, and turning public enterprises into joint ventures by bringing in private participation.
The objectives here were crystal clear and super urgent. The state needed to accelerate economic development, hit economies of scale, and seriously boost global competitiveness. To pull this off, the government made a highly deliberate choice. They started offloading public investments from low-tech, non-strategic, or just plain inefficient areas. Basically, if the private sector had finally built up enough expertise in an area, the government realized, okay, it's time for us to step back and let them lead.
And this really ushered in a new era. Instead of the government trying to get its hands on literally everything, which just wasted scarce resources, they decided to drastically reduce their budgetary burden. Today, the new role is way more focused on essential, motivational functions. It's all about providing rock-solid infrastructure and setting up a healthy environment for growth and justice, while finally relieving everyday consumers from the indifferent attitude of those massive public sector monopolies.
Which brings us to today, and a question I really want to leave you with. Since the business world is evolving at just a breakneck pace, should the government step back even further and rely entirely on the private sector? Or are there emerging industries, like AI or green energy, that still desperately need the state's invisible hand to guide them towards social justice? Think about that the next time you interact with a business today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.